welcome to a very special segment of Wake Up and Live with the Arts. I'm James McGilbray, along with Sue Johnson and our videographer Lester Bryant Sr. And today is a special day. This might even be historic in many ways. I'm pleased to be able to bring a couple of people together who span generations, but who also share a history, careers, and we're going to have a dialogue about what has been, what is now, how those two things are bridged. So first and foremost, let me introduce a couple of very special people. To my immediate right is Roy Richardson. And this very fine gentleman is a Tuskegee Airman. For those of you who are not familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen, this branch of the military, as it were, even predates what we now call the Air Force. And so we'll get into some stories there. But Roy, so good to see you again. Very good to have you.
Very good to be here.
And to his right is someone else who's very special and particularly special to me. It's my own little sister, and when I say little, I mean big little sister, because she just finished 32 years in the United States Air Force serving the nation, and just a wonderful human being in addition to being a wonderful servant of the nation. So we're going to bring them together in a conversation here, and to give you a little bit of a background, the way I came to know Roy, some years ago, Vicki Williams, a wonderful playwright, wrote a play called Commemorative, and it was about the Tuskegee Airmen who were alive in this area, and I had the very distinct privilege and honor to play Roy. And we are, in fact, in the same theater now where that happened. In fact, you may hear in the background, there's some rehearsals. This is a vibrant space. It's an amazing place with wonderful energy. So if you hear that in the background, it's just more things being created. And so I had the pleasure of playing Roy, and he was in the audience along with his wonderful daughter, and so no pressure there, right? And it was a wonderful production, and so we've had a chance to talk, and I'm going to begin here with Roy. Let's go back to how it got started. So what made you ultimately decide to sign up and to serve the nation in a military capacity?
Well, it just happened that I happened to be at Columbus, Ohio, for the high school track meet.
Mm-hmm.
And that Saturday morning, well, the whole team was staying at the Neal House, I think it was in Columbus. It was a wonderful hotel. And while waiting for the bus to take us to the Ohio State Stadium, my friend and I, we went downstairs and sat on the curb, and we heard all this music in the background, and it was a parade starting. And so we're going to sit on this curb and watch the parade.
Yes.
Well, as the parade got closer to us, you could hear these bells ringing from the glockenspiels, they call it. You could hear these bells ringing for blocks away. And then as they got closer, they were leading the parade. Well, let me say this. When they got close, I looked at them, and all of them were in their military uniforms, impeccably dressed, and they were all black. And I asked someone standing there, I said, well, where'd these guys come from? They said, about 10 miles out of town. So, Groveport, Ohio, that's where they were stationed. And as they got closer, and it enthused me. So I said, well, I was in the band East Tech High School in Cleveland. I say, well, maybe when I get out of school, I can sign up and join and get in this band, because it's the only black band in the Army.
Yes.
We were in the Army at that time.
Okay.
And, Tuskegee Airmen started, well, they were on the end before integration. They were mixed in for the United States Air Force, but at that time, it was the Army. And when I completed my training at school, I decided to, my friend of mine come to me and he said, Roy, come on, let's join the Army. I said, I don't want to join the Army. He's like, come on, we're not doing anything. You can't find a job and so forth. So we caught the streetcar and we went downtown Cleveland to the Federal Building. It's not the Federal Building that's there now. It was diagonally across the street. So we went up and we signed some papers and everything. And first thing the sergeant said, well, go downstairs, get undressed, and take a physical. So when we took the physical and everything was finished and went back upstairs, and I was going to go across the street to a telephone. Telephone things were 5 cents, the Ohio bill. So I was going to go and call my mother and tell her I'd joined the Army. So this sergeant, he said, well, where do you think you're going? I said, I'm going to call home and tell them I joined the Army. The sergeant said, no, you're not going anywhere. He said, you're in the Army now. And so he had all of us get dressed. We went across the street to the terminal tower, went down the escalator, and they put us on a train. And the next thing I know, we're headed to Texas. My mother don't even know where I am.
Right.
So for 3 days, we were on that train going to Texas. There was only way of traveling at that time was the train, Greyhound bus, or Continental Trailway. No one had automobiles. Very few people had automobiles. And the streetcars were the trolley cars were the main sources of traveling around the city. So I finally got to Texas and I called my mother, and the Red Cross informed me that our pay was $50 a month. Wow. The Red Cross took $10 of that to send back to my mother.
Okay.
And so it doesn't sound like very much. But at that time, a period of time, everything was cheap. A loaf of bread, 3 cents. A gallon of gas, 9 cents. Newspaper was 2 cents or 2 or 3 cents. Cleveland had 3 newspapers. Cleveland Plain Dealer, Cleveland News, and Cleveland Press. So only thing we had to buy was toothpaste and cigarettes if you smoked.
So that money was going to go a long ways, basically.
Oh yeah, $40 went around.
Well, what's so dramatic about that story to me, and that's why I wanted you to tell it, was you'd made the decision, I'm going to enlist, and it was, you were in then, and taken all the way to Texas. And speaking of Texas, Gwendolyn, what state do you currently live in?
I live in Texas.
All right. But now, when you enlisted in the Air Force, it was a little bit different procedure. So, first of all, why did you decide to enlist, and what was the procedure that you were involved in when, you know, obviously they didn't just put you on a train and say you're in the Air Force now. So, why did you decide to enlist, and what was the procedure that happened after that?
Well, after attending Michigan State for a couple of semesters after high school, I found that I didn't have the money to continue school. And quite honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had looked at the services. As you know, our grandmother served in the Korean War as a nurse, and my dad as a Navy machinist mate. So I thought about service, and was led to a couple of recruiting stations, and just went in and asked a few questions, and I liked what I heard. My mom was on board, and there you have it.
Yes.
Off to Kalamazoo to process, and then to Detroit for the flight to San Antonio.
But it wasn't like the same day, right?
No, it wasn't. No, not at all. It took a few days. I had to go through the physical fitness process, getting medically cleared to actually join, and getting all the paperwork signed off. You know, there's nothing but paperwork in the
Right.
military, but that's how that process started.
Well, now, when you became enlisted, you still didn't quite know what you wanted to do. But let me ask you this, in terms of officers, in terms of fellow enlistees, this was clearly integrated at this point. You had black, you had white, you had Hispanic. It was a rainbow of people. Is that?
That is correct.
Yeah.
You saw every race, every creed on that airplane, on that flight to San Antonio, and it was a good time. We did have our moments, but it was a very good time to join the service in the
Yes.
early 80s.
But now, how is that experience different from yours in terms of the races, Roy?
Well, when I got to Texas, it was segregated, and the white fellas had two-story wooden barracks. When I got there, we had plywood tar paper shacks, and they would hold 30 men in 15 on each aisle, and the beds were staggered. Head here, the other head would be up at the opposite end. And then you dare not go outside at night if you had to go to the restroom. You took a pan or a bucket or something with you, because you stepped outside there's a lot of snakes there. And it looked like they favored the latrine that they had. It was one building with nothing but commodes and sinks and so forth. You don't want to go out there at night. And at night it would get cold, even Texas. It would be so cold in Texas at night that you had to sleep under a blanket. But during the day it was 105, 110 degrees and so forth. So it got to the point where we just got along pretty well. And all the blacks at that time, most of the blacks were confined to base service squadrons. Otherwise, the big brass in the military didn't think that the blacks could be good soldiers. So they had menial jobs, truck drivers or mechanics or cooks or something like that. Base service squadron, that's exactly what it meant, the base service. You service the base. So when we finished our basic training, and all the blacks, when they marched you outside and they had the roll call, and they called one name Fairbanks, Alaska, called another name Okinawa. And between Okinawa and Fairbanks, Alaska, there's only two places they would send you. So when they finished, they never called my name, and Charlie Hall from New York, they never called his name. So we went up and asked him where were we supposed to go. We said, did you hear your name? He said, no. He said, well, just sit back and wait till you get some orders. So we floated around the base for about a month, and finally they called us into the orderly room and told us that we were coming to Columbus, Ohio, Lockbourne Air Base.
Right.
And we were assigned to the 766 Army Band. And we stayed there. It was nice. I loved it. All you had to do was practice all day. So you had a chance to learn different instruments because of the fellas getting out of the service, and then somebody had to replace them.
Sure.
So I picked up on the oboe, French horn, tuba. I love their tuba. And then the glockenspiel, those bells, and clarinet. I played the clarinet and the trumpet.
Well, and one of the things that you did with your squadron was to help the morale of the troops, and as I recall, there was a famous general that you kind of...
Chappie James?
Yeah.
He was the last guy in the world I thought that would become a general. He was my CO. What happened was, on every Tuesday night at Lockbourne, we had a talent show. And it happened to be some top brass from Washington, happened to be on the base that evening, and nothing to do, so they came to our talent show. And when it was over, they went to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis got 3 promotions in one day. He got promoted from a captain to major, major to lieutenant colonel, and then to a full bird colonel, all that in one day. Because in order to be commander of a base, you had to be at least a lieutenant, a colonel. And so they went to Colonel Davis and I told him, say, this show was terrific. We're looking for something like this. You think you could let these fellas in the show go on the road and entertain the troops? And so he was a little reluctant, but he let us go. And Chappie James, at that time, was the first lieutenant.
Right.
And he formed the 21st Special Service Unit.
Well, now, there's something you said, and I want to come back to that, but you mentioned the word confined came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to come back to that in terms of what Chappie James sometimes did with notes from the troops and what happened with some of the black soldiers based upon that incident with wanting to go to the, to see that entertainment facility where it was only for certain people. I'll come back.
Well, it was for all of the troops, but the only thing is that the stands or the seats were segregated.
Right.
All the blacks were in the back, the whites were up front, and so Chappie got to the point where he told the commanding officer whenever we went to a base, first thing he would tell them, we do not play before segregated audience.
That's right.
We were down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and he told the commanding officer, he said, if seats are segregated, we will not be there. So what happened was he agreed to it. But Chappie would fly ahead of us in a P-51 Mustang, make all the arrangements, and the rest of the troop would go on 2 C-47 transport planes. One was for the port personnel, and the other one was for the equipment. So we stayed there 2 or 3 days and pack up and go to another base. So...
well, now, here's the point that I'm going to come back to is there were some black troops that ended up being locked up.
Oh, yeah.
I'll come back to that
yeah.
for just a second, but now, Gwen, so at this point, in terms of your history, you basically went in, and where did they send you once you'd done, so you went to basic training first, right?
Yes.
And that was in San Antonio?
Yes.
And what happened, were you then sent, and what was the process as your career began from that point?
Basically, after basic, my technical school, the job the Air Force chose for me, it was there in San Antonio at Brooks Air Force Base, which is now closed. I was in the Environmental Health Services at the time, and part of our training was there in San Antonio at the Air Force Base, and then at Army Base. I can't recall the name of it right now, but there's so many down there.
Texas has a bunch.
Oh, yes, ma'am, they do. And so after technical training, I was all excited to go overseas, and I was told to get on a little blue bus, and you're going to Wichita Falls. That was my first duty station.
Okay.
So I stayed in Texas for quite a while during my first couple of years in service.
And then where did you deploy overseas at that point?
Oh
or?
gosh, I received orders to Hawaii, but I was diverted to Okinawa after about 2 years at Shepherd. I served, as you mentioned, 32 years, and in those 32 years I had 13 assignments.
Wow.
So,
Were any of those during the various wars? We had wars in Iraq, and and there was Kuwait, and were any of those?
oh yes, Desert Storm, absolutely.
So you were involved with Desert Storm?
Actually, I was stationed in Japan at the time, and in a medical group, and they sent out a group from Langley to go help with that incident.
What did they do? What did you have to do? You said that incident, so just kind of bring that out a little bit.
I didn't have to do anything for that.
Okay.
It depended on the needs of the Air Force or whoever was in theater and what they needed at that time. And my job as a public health technician, environmental health technician, there were environmental health technicians at just about every base. So it just depended on what they needed, what the requirements were. If you were available, if your command would let you go, that determined whether or not you actually deployed. And now they have a deployment system that's very complex, but you will get a chance to deploy nowadays.
And did you end up having to go to Kuwait or to Iraq or any of those?
Absolutely. I got a chance to go to Afghanistan and
Well, tell us
Saudi
about
Arabia.
where all did you end up? Because you mentioned 13 deployments. I mean, I'd kind of like to know a list of all of those places that you ended up.
I started out Shepherd Air Force Base a couple of years, and then on my way to Hickam, I thought, ended up being Okinawa. For a couple of years. After that, I went to Yokota Air Base. Eventually did get to Hickam in Hawaii. Then spent a good number of years stateside as well in Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy. Back in Texas at Brooks Air Force Base doing occupational health consulting. And then I commissioned later on in the years. But it was a wonderful ride. Wonderful.
32 years worth, and you graduated
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
colonel. Is that, yeah?
Well, I appreciate that promotion. I was actually a major.
Oh, a major.
When I retired.
Why did you have me thinking she was a colonel?
Well, there was a situation with a promotion that would have gotten her there, but there was another. Explain how this worked with this.
It was just simply a matter of being double stacked, two majors in one place, and me being assigned as the deputy commander and not having flight commander.
But you
on
had
my
been
record.
flight commander, hadn't you?
Yes.
So explain how in the world do you go from being a flight commander to being a deputy flight commander?
Well, it's complicated.
It's Air Force, it's military.
You can be. The base I was stationed before, yes, I was flight commander. It was a smaller installation. The installation I was stationed following that was a very large installation. We were authorized for 3 officers. I did not know I went there knowing there was an officer, but did not know they were going to double book as major. So that kind of shot my chances. I didn't know it at the time. I found out later on in the process that it kind of...
That other major got the
crippled me.
promotion.
Oh, yes, he did.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes.
So now, as we can get ready to wrap up in a little bit, but we'll kind of take it, because part of what when I mentioned this confinement, I recall that there was a situation where there was like 101 officers, black officers, that ended up essentially being imprisoned by our own military establishment. Is that correct? That story is a dramatic one. Will you please tell what happened in that situation? And this brings a contrast to how the military is now. If you don't mind telling that story.
Well, it so happened that we had 4 fighter squadrons, and they were still graduating cadets. They had anywhere to put them. So they started a bombing group, the 477th Medium Bombardment Group. And these fellows trained in B-25 medium bombers. So what happened, Colonel Selway and General Hunter they swore that they would never teach them how to go into combat. So while they were at Indiana, Freeman Field in Indiana. Well, at the end of the day, in fact, when the class graduated, they didn't have anywhere to send them. So they had them train over again. Some of them trained 4 times. They knew more than the instructors trying to teach them.
Yeah.
So in the evening, during the night, there's nothing to do. Lieutenant Young, Coleman Young, ex-mayor of Detroit,
Right.
he decided to test this segregation law, and they got a group of guys together. He sent 3 of them up to the officers' club, the white officers' club. The officer of the day turned them around and said they couldn't come in. While they're walking back, 7 or 8 more come in. While they're walking back, here come 15 or 20, and the officer of the day didn't know what to do. He called Colonel Selways. So, strict segregationists.
Right.
He come up in a Jeep, and it was over his head, so he got on the phone and called General Hunter. General Hunter said, hell no, them niggas ain't coming in that club, close the damn thing.
Mhm.
So that's what they did. They closed the officers' club. And then a couple of days later, they rounded everybody up in the hangar and came out with some little phony card that White Officers Club was off limits to black officers. They didn't call them officers, they called them trainees. And it was against the government regulations. So they wanted them to sign that they read and understood. This 101 wouldn't sign it. They said, we read it, but we don't understand it. So they had them arrested. They called them in one at a time, trying to pressure them to do it, and they wouldn't do it. So they called in 6 C-47 transport planes, marched them out to the tarmac, the field, the airfield. The field was surrounded with white MPs with submachine guns. They loaded them all up in these 6 planes. They took off and flew east to New York, Mitchell Field, and then they turned and came back west. And everybody was looking to see, well, all of them are pilots. They're trying to see if they can recognize some of the terrain. And then when they crossed the Ohio River, they said, oh, hell, we're going to Godman Field in Kentucky.
Right near Fort Knox.
Across the street,
Right.
across the road. So they put them in 4 buildings there at Godman Field. They had a construction crew come over and put 4 posts over the 4 buildings, chain link barbed wire fence, spotlight on each post, and then they had a 24-hour guard walking around this thing to make sure no one got out. And they charged him with treason, disobeying a superior officer because he wouldn't sign this card, a dishonorable discharge, and the possibility of death. So when they sent this to, President Roosevelt had died, Truman was the president. When they sent this to Truman to sign, and Truman looked at it, how the hell am I going to execute 101 officers in the United States Army? So that's when he came out with Executive Order 9981, and he integrated all of the services. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, all of them. And he caught a lot of flack up behind that too. So that's when, it was in 1946, I think it was 46, but it didn't take effect until 1948. And then after 48, it still didn't take effect. They didn't really start integrating until 1949. And what they did, a base needed 5 mechanics. They call off 5 names and send them. They need 5 truck drivers, 5 over here. The pilots, Major Fitzroy Newsom and Colonel McGee. Those 2 went to Smoky Hills Air Base. That's where I went. Smoky Hills Air Base in Kansas, Salina, Kansas. When I got out there into Kansas, you see nothing, no trees, no houses, no factories. And the closest city was Topeka. That was 90 miles away. So you're laying in bed, and then you're laying in bed at night, and well, I was the only black in my unit. They didn't want me in there. I get ready to go to bed at night, my mattress is soaked with water, and I got to sleep on the floor. I can laugh about it now, I wasn't laughing then.
Back then, yeah.
And so I thought I could stay and retire in the service, but after 6 months, they closed that base, Smoky Hills Air Base, and they moved to Barksdale Field in Shreveport, Louisiana, and that was 10 times worse. So the band was invited to play for the Mardi Gras, lead the parade in Mardi Gras. And the chief come to me and he said, Roy, you know the conditions of the South. He said, we're invited to lead the parade, but you won't be able to play. And I said, that's all right, Chief. He said, you can make the trip. He said, and I'll get you a fifth of whiskey or whatever you want. And just do what you want to do. Just be back when the plane leaves and go back to the base. That was when I made up my mind to put in for resignation.
And so you know what, we need to have you back where we can continue this conversation, and particularly about your book in development, about the red birds before they were red tails, something
red
like
tails. Everybody know about the red tails.
Yeah, so we need to schedule you, if you're willing and interested, where we can do an entire segment about and continue your story, because it is beyond fascinating. Because now we have another guest, 2 guests, where we need to talk to them. They are not military, but they are folks who were in history, the Emperor of Lincoln Street, about this African American man who was trying to build his territory. And Miss Gwen, it's been so much fun having you on the show, and a major, oh shoot, I had you as a colonel, honey.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And so, James, if you'll close out this session so we can get our next group in.
Well, I'll close it out here, but I did have one question I needed to ask with regard to that, because with segregation having been what it was then, clearly what he went through paved the way for you to be able to do what you did. And I just thought you might have, you might want to express a little appreciation to Roy for everything that he did. And also Roy, might want to, just say, it's so good to see that an African American female can now, so between the two of you, would you have a question or something that you would like to say to each other?
Well, I'd like to say thank you. Certainly my service, my years of service, the racism wasn't as overt, it was more covert. It was there, but it wasn't as bad as what you were, as blatant as what you were describing. And your bravery is just awe-inspiring. I thank you so much, because you paved the way not only for me, but for all airmen and all races. So I thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. And one thing I would like to emphasize is that the Tuskegee Airmen were all men. We had 4 squadrons of women. And in my book, I wanted to put some pictures of some of the women, what they did, mechanics, truck drivers, cooks, dentists, lawyers, and so forth, and the parachute riggers. I want to put this picture in my book that I can't describe the shack, parachute shack. It's just a round Quonset.
Quonset, yes.
And it was long, and long enough for them to stretch the parachute out. So, and then the 302nd Fighter Squadron had the same thing for an officers club. Well, it's hard to explain what these things look like without the picture.
But you're going to be doing that, and that's coming out soon, as I understand it.
Around June or July of this year.
Well, and to
hopefully.
And to segue to hopefully the second segment that we'll have at some point down the road. When is your book? It's called, first of all, Before the Tales Were Read.
Yeah.
When is the book scheduled for publication?
Say,
Between June and July.
Okay, and for those that are hearing, that's Roy's daughter. And so we're looking at publication June, July. And hopefully, if with your kind assistance, we can have him back to specifically promote the book. Is that?
Absolutely.
All right, terrific.
before we close, can you give me those posters, Stace?
Oh, this is something kind of special that I think is. He'd given me a little bit of a hint, but I wasn't sure. And so I
Can
see
we
what's happening.
hold it up for it?
Oh, want to open it up here? And explain what this is, Roy.
Oh my goodness. Wait a minute,
Let's hold, let's
They're all
get.
original signatures.
okay.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Can you get that, Les? Okay, let's angle it up just a little bit more to see his face. Okay, and that is all of their signatures.
This was taken in Washington in the Rotunda.
Oh,
And who's this cute fella right here?
This here?
Yeah.
That's me.
oh,
And I have relatives down in the close to Atlanta, and I wanted them to. They had a brother and a sister retired from the Air Force, so they asked me if I would mail something like this to them, and a coin. And I have a coin here for you also. I think it's.
Can you get it?
Get it out of my pocket. No, it's really cards. I got it here somewhere. But, oh, here we are. I wanted to present that to you. That's the congressional medal that President Bush presented to us in 2007.
Oh, hold that
Thank
up,
you,
Gwen,
sir.
so that people can see that.
that is beautiful.
Can
And
you
we'll
get
get a
that,
close-up of this. We're going to later on show, Roy has a beautiful hat from the Tuskegee Airman that has wonderful patches, and we're going to show you the dignity and the splendor of that piece, and we'll do a close-up of that as well.
And I'll have to mail this to you because I won't get them back until tomorrow night.
Holy
Oh, my.
smokes.
This was in 1948 when this picture was taken, May 9th.
There's some glare. Is the glare off?
No, it's all right.
Is it okay, honey?
It's all
And
right.
I
That's
had,
amazing.
Oh, it's good, but I got a tan.
they made reproductions for me down in.
And then you see some of the women in there.
That is amazing.
Mhm. Sure.
McIntyre, the mama was one of the first African-American female pilots in the country.
And,
Was that Dorothy? Was her mother
Bessie
Dorothy?
Smith. Was it Bessie Smith or Bessie Coleman?
So you want to roll this up carefully. Which way do you want to?
I'm gonna mail one like this to you. I just
Okay.
wanted to show
Okay,
you what it
great.
looked like.
Oh, that's wonderful.
This
Well,
is my
listen,
original.
Sir,
this
I
is
have
just
to-
so beautiful.
Just a matter of point. Sir, I would love to honor you with a salute. Thank you so much.
Okay. So some of these come in, it should be here tomorrow,
Okay.
and I'll see that you get it.
That's beautiful. Thank
I'll
you
get
so
one
much.
for you too soon,
And
Thank
if you
you.
think you'd like one.
I would
with
love-
that, as the conversation continues, we conclude this segment. We hope you've enjoyed it and that you found it as historic as we thought it would be. Roy Richardson, Gwen Boleware, and I'm James McGilbray with Sue Johnson. We'll be back.
And Lester Bryant, Air Force.
Lester
Our videographer
was
and
Air
editor
Force.
is an Air Force veteran.
Yeah,
Yes.
8 years.
8
8
years.
years. And he served in England and England.
All right. And Lester as well. Lester Bryant Sr.
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay.
We'll be back.
Okay.